Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and tonight I'm going to be talking about gematria again, the art of gematria, finding number values for different letters and finding the significance of words by doing so. I spoke about that in my last video, and I kind of summarized the inherited wisdom that we have about gematria and some other Kabbalistic techniques for finding meanings in words. Tonight what I want to do is share my own innovations and what I would argue are my own unique and valuable findings in the area of gematria, specifically identifying a method for an English gematria and a method for an Enochian gematria. If you don't know anything about gematria, I would recommend that you watch my previous video before you watch this one for some background. I will link that in the description below. But to summarize, there's sort of two main categories of what is considered today gematria. That is the traditional Hebrew gematria, which of course assigns a numeric value to each letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And then there's Greek gematria, which is also known as isopsephy, where the letters of the Greek alphabet are given a number. And they're two different systems, different ways of getting number values for different letters, depending on whether you transliterate into the Hebrew or the Greek. So when we're talking about gematria, most of the time we're talking about Hebrew or Greek words from those alphabets. But other kinds of gematria have been hypothesized, such as an English gematria and an Enochian gematria, and attempts have been made to kind of come up with a system of assigning numeric values for each of those languages. And I have made my own attempts at doing so, and I believe that I have arrived at some very, very interesting results. And I should say as well, in the course of me preparing for this video, particularly thinking of how I can justify what I've come up with for the Enochian gematria, it sent me down a rabbit hole of research into ancient languages, which kind of set off a flash of realization for me in terms of something about the Enochian language and how important it is. And so I'll share those insights at the end of this video as well. I'm very excited. I've just connected some dots to do with the Enochian system and some very, very ancient mysteries. So I'm keen to share that with you at the end of this video as well. But first of all, allow me to go through the systems of gematria that I have devised, starting with the easier one, the English gematria. So, as you probably all know, if you follow this channel for a while, I was very, very interested in thelema for a long time. The main magical systems that I have followed in order to transform myself mostly have been thelemic, and it was through my exploration of thelema that I first came across the concept of an English gematria, or as it's sometimes referred to, an English Qabalah. This is something that is particularly spoken about, written about in the thelemic world with reference to the Book of the Law. That is because it is kind of in the Book of the Law that a new English gematria is suggested as something which must be brought about sometime in the not too distant future, a way of giving an order and a value to the English alphabet, as it says in the Book of the Law. And so this has given rise to many, many attempts to try and find what that order and value might be for the English letters. And I made my own attempt while I was in the Argentium Astrum, and I'm pretty proud of the result. So this is what I came up with, and allow me to just talk you through it. So if you're talking about a system of gematria, what it usually means is you create a row of numbers 1 to 9, and once you reach 9 you start a new row, 10, 20, 30, 40 and so on. So you reach 90, and then a third where things go into the hundreds. And what you're trying to do is create a orderly as possible system of filling the numbers of 1 to 9, 10 to 90, and 100 to 900 with letters from a particular alphabet. So in the Hebrew alphabet, you can do this with only 22 letters initially, but if you subscribe to the idea that some of the Hebrew letters have a final form, then that bumps you up to get into the high hundreds in your Gematria chart. In the Greek isopsephy, it's a bit easier because there's more letters to choose from. And in both Hebrew and Greek Gematria, there are methods for doing this, all the way up to 900. So in a perfect system of English Gematria, you should have a way of doing this as well, of finding 27 figures exactly to fill in your 9x3 table. There's just one problem. There's only 26 letters of the English alphabet, and there's no final forms of any letters or anything like that. So what's the solution to this? Well, I came across a novel solution to this puzzle when I was sort of thumbing through the Book of the Law one time a few years ago, looking at the different letters and how an English Qabalah might emerge from the words of that text. And it was then that I noticed something curious. At several points within the text, rather than using the word and, A-N-D, it actually uses an ampersand, the and symbol. So if the purpose of the English Gematria is to gain insight into the letters and the words used in the Book of the Law, then by necessity, such a system must include the ampersand as one of its letters. And as it so happens, there is literature out there which considers the ampersand to be the 27th letter of the English alphabet. So all of a sudden, we have a very neat 27-lettered alphabet that fits into each of the boxes. I remember that at the time, I recorded this system of English Gematria in my magical journal, which I then gave to my superior in the Order of the Argentium Astrum. He actually hinted that he had come up with pretty much the same system for giving a numeric value to the English alphabet to create an English Gematria. So I'm pretty settled on this as what should be considered the correct form of English Gematria. I haven't seen what that means in terms of calculating the value of things in the Book of the Law, because Thelema isn't really my trip anymore, although there's still some things that I've brought out of that belief system that I consider valuable. It's really not a paradigm that I operate in really anymore. But I do have this system of English Gematria, which I think is quite valuable for those who are looking for such a system. So if you're interested, why not give it a test drive for yourself? You might even want to tell me the results of your research and your experiments in the comments below. Is there any numeric attribution to an English word that you find significant using this method? Let me know. So that's how I propose that we could generate a Gematria for the English alphabet. What about the Enochian alphabet? Well, it was a lot more complex for me to try and come up with a system for this. Before we can even consider an Enochian Gematria, we have to think about the structure of the Enochian alphabet and how it compares to other alphabets, in particular Greek and Hebrew. As I studied the structure of the Enochian alphabet, and I rearranged the order of the letters to be more like the order that the letters appear in Greek and Hebrew rather than in English, I started to notice some interesting patterns. I noticed that in many respects, the Enochian alphabet, the kind of letters that do appear and the phonetic value of those letters very closely parallels the Greek, with the main exception being that the letters that sort of appear at the end of the Greek alphabet, phi, psi, omega, don't really make an appearance in the Enochian alphabet, but in other respects is very similar to Greek in structure rather than like Hebrew. And the reason that I say that is because in the Enochian alphabet, there's no equivalent to the letter tzadi, unlike in Hebrew where there is such a letter. And the reason why that's important is because in Greek gematria, or isopsephy, your letter R, or rho in that case, is 100. Your letter tau is worth 300. In Hebrew gematria, the tau is 400. The resh, which is the equivalent of the letter R or rho, is worth 200. And the quof, the letter Q, is worth 100. So everything is bumped up by one positioning. And that's because here, at the value of 90, tzadi appears. And it doesn't appear in the Greek. And that's why I think that the order of the letters in the Enochian alphabet is closer to Greek than Hebrew. And some other interesting anomalies arise because of this, which leads us down an even deeper rabbit hole. And I'll get into that in a minute because it's fascinating. But first of all, let's see where it takes us if we just number the Enochian letters the same as we would number their Greek equivalents, given that structurally there's more similarities in that respect. What we arrive at is this set of number values. Given that when you're comparing Hebrew and Greek gematrias, where there is a similar letter in each alphabet, they're given the same numeric value, and given the structure of Enochian seems closer to Greek than Hebrew, I would propose that these are the best numeric values for an Enochian gematria, based on that comparative analysis. Now, there's a few interesting little things that you'll notice about this table. Square number 9 is blank. That's because in the Enochian alphabet, there is no equivalent to the Hebrew letter tet, or the Greek, which is the same as the Greek letter theta. In the Hebrew, it's a t sound. In the Greek, it's a th sound. But it's a second kind of a letter T. That doesn't appear in the Enochian. And that's very interesting. The other thing as well is when most people think of Greek isopsephy or gematria, they think of an alphabet that does not include a Q or an F. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting. If we go back further in time, before there was a Greek language, before there was a Hebrew language, into the time of ancient Phoenician, which is the alphabet which was the origin point of both Greek and Hebrew, and if we go back from ancient Phoenician even further back to the proto-sinaitic alphabet, there are a lot of similarities between that and Enochian. So for example, although we don't associate the letter F or Q with the Greek alphabet today, an earlier form of the ancient Greek alphabet did include a letter F in the form of digamma and a letter Q in the form of copper, which later got dropped, but reflect an evolution from an earlier language. And if you look at the shapes of the Enochian letters, there are some kind of similarities to the shapes of Phoenician letters in the Phoenician alphabet. So it looks like there's a lot of similarities between the Enochian alphabet and early alphabets that were more ancient than Hebrew or Greek and gave rise to them. And this becomes really fascinating when you consider what the angels told Dee and Kelly about the significance of the Enochian alphabet, which is that it was the language that was spoken by Adam in the Garden of Eden, and so it is a more ancient language than Hebrew or Greek, and really the progenitor of those two languages. And so this seems to be lending credence to that theory. There are a few problems with that though. For one thing, the letters Teth and Tzadi, or their equivalents, also exist in the proto-sinaitic script, as well as in Phoenician, and of course those two letters don't make their way into the Enochian alphabet. And the Greek upsilon, which is the equivalent of this letter here, didn't appear in the alphabet until Phoenician evolved into Greek, and not earlier than that. So there's a few little anomalies there, but languages change and develop over time. And now here's an interesting thing. The proto-sinaitic script, which was commonly used in the Levant and the region of ancient Canaan, actually came from ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. And the origin of the Egyptian hieroglyphics was just a few hundred years after Adam was said to have lived in the Bible. If you calculate all the genealogies and how long people lived and when people were born and so forth, it comes to about 6,000 years ago that Adam would have been born. Now, ancient Egyptian is not the oldest written language. It's certainly up there, but it's got a big competitor in the form of Sumerian cuneiform script, which is probably older. But the thing that's interesting about ancient Sumerian versus ancient Egyptian writing is that ancient Sumerian appears to have come about through a process of trial and error, of making an inferior language and then having to build upon it and develop it until it was something that was respectable, which is why it began earlier, because there was much longer process for it to be properly developed into its final form. In contrast, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics appear to have just appeared, and no one quite understands how it was developed. And so, if you wanted to have an alphabet, a written language in the form of an alphabet that Adam would have spoken, which came before ancient Egyptian, you might very well have something that looks just like this. And of course, we're talking about an alphabet, not hieroglyphics, and the similarities between these figures and some of the oldest letters in the world in the form of the Phoenician script. When you consider all that, this is a very strong candidate for the Adamic language. And I always thought that the claim about the Enochian language going back to Adam and being the language that Adam spoke, he was taught by the angels and all of that, I thought that it was kind of just a far-fetched backstory for this language, but it actually makes a lot more sense than I gave it credit for. And there's some other interesting connections here as well. So, of course, we have the ancient Egyptian civilization. Where did that come from? You have to go back into the mists of time before known history began. But of course, there are stories such as come down from Plato and have been provided by some of the great mystics, even into the last 100 years. There are stories of an earlier civilization that gave rise to the Egyptian civilization, which is the Atlantean civilization of legend. And there's at least one source that I've come across, the Enochian workbook, which posits one theory of the origin of the Enochian language as being the language that was spoken in Atlantis. And there's another connection here as well, because, of course, Atlantis and the story of Atlantis, it is another one of the great flood myths. It is a story about an advanced civilization before a flood, which was inhabited by human beings, and also, if you believe some of the channeled wisdom regarding Atlantis, there were kind of these other heavenly beings that dwelt in the midst of that civilization and gave them knowledge. But eventually it became corrupt, and that is why the flood had to happen. And that is the exact story of the Book of Enoch, of the antediluvian civilization of the Bible, and those beings who dwelt amongst mortals in that antediluvian civilization were, of course, the angels. And so, if humanity before the flood was taught by the angels, and the Atlantean civilization was taught by these other higher beings, then that is consistent with the language that would have been Atlantean, that is remembered in time as Atlantean, which gave rise to the ancient Egyptian language, actually being the language that was passed down to humanity by the angels. So this is all speculation. It's not necessarily something that I believe in strongly at this point, but there are some very compelling connections between different stories through time, and a kind of consistency to the story of the Enochian language, which is getting hard for me to ignore. At the very least, I have come to believe that the Enochian language really is a strong candidate for the Adamic language. Whatever stories, whatever legends we use to remember those times, is besides the point. There does seem to have been that connection in the past, and the Enochian system would seem to be, for all intents and purposes, a legitimate reconstruction of that very ancient knowledge, which of course is exactly what it claims to be. And if you compare the ancient Egyptian language or the ancient Egyptian alphabet to the Enochian alphabet, there is a kind of level of perfection in the Enochian alphabet that doesn't exist in the Egyptian alphabet. For example, in this alphabet you have exactly 21 letters, which from the point of view of sacred geometry is very important because it contains the number 7 times the number 3, both extremely sacred numbers. The sacred 7, the 7 heavens, the 7 musical notes, the 7 colours of the rainbow, the number of the permutation of phenomena of the created universe, and then you've got the number 3, which is the triune mystery of the divine, and the two working together to create this language, which is a perfect language for naming creation. And another thing that this does that Hebrew doesn't do, for example, is it doesn't end at the letter Tav, so the letter T. So what that means is that it ends at this letter here, which is a U sound. And there is another letter in a different alphabet, namely the Greek alphabet, that has that same characteristic. Although this is the same as upsilon for numeric purposes, in the Greek alphabet we also get a U sound from the letter omega. And so when this appears, as it does in this alphabet, what we're getting is a preservation of the mystery of the alpha and the omega. So I must stress that this is all highly speculative on my part, but you've got to admit that this material presents some very compelling possibilities, and I hope that you have enjoyed exploring those possibilities with me tonight, and hopefully it's given you some food for thought. And if you did enjoy this video, please like the video, subscribe to my channel to support my work, and if you want to give me extra support, you can hit the join or thanks buttons down below. And of course, if you have any comments that you'd like to leave about all of this, please do that in the comments below. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.